we are back, and there's some stuff going on with AI, bro. In the AI world, we gotta pay attention to what's going on in the AI world, right? Because that's the future. Listen to this shit, bro. Listen to this.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman detailing alleged efforts by Facebook parent Meta to poach some of his top AI talent. Altman told a podcast hosted by his brother that Meta offered $100 million signing bonuses to OpenAI employees, but none of what he called OpenAI's best people have jumped ship as of yet.
What are we playing basketball for anymore?
NBC hasn't confirmed the offers, and it's unclear how many were made or taken at this point. But competition for top AI talent is ramping up in Silicon Valley. Just a few days ago, Meta invested more than $14 billion in startup scale AI and tapped its boss to head a new AI team. I don't know how long.
We're all just poaching each other's teams.
I don't know how long the $100 million is for. I was quickly going to look up the top 10 Major League Baseball.
Oh, I just said it's like a baseball player, right? If you sign him.
I mean, what's Aaron Judge's latest
it's
contract?
A lot. Yeah. I don't know. I have to look it up.
Pale by, no one's quite at a 10-figure, but they're getting pretty darn close.
$360 million for 9 years for Aaron Judge.
Yeah, they're getting up like at 500. They're halfway.
Yeah, halfway there.
Halfway.
I mean, this is the thing, though. These are, if you're really in this race, and the leaders in the race are sometimes weeks ahead of the
guys. When there's this much money involved, it's going to start getting mafioso, like for real.
guy behind them. You're going to pay up for the top talent.
Could add billions.
There's a limited number of
right.
people who are doing this, and you're right. It could add billions to your market cap. It puts a huge amount of pressure on OpenAI to actually go public, so they can kind of offer sweeteners to keep some of these people here, and to go to a for-profit model from what it's been to this point. Now, Altman in this podcast where he was talking to his brother said stuff like, "Well,
remember OpenAI was nonprofit, and that's changed.
I don't think."
Has Sam Altman said why? Why did OpenAI? It's a good question, right? Let's see.
OpenAI went stopped being nonprofit or split up in 20. Can you describe that whole process?
Yeah,
how
so
things stand?
We started as a nonprofit. We learned early on that we were going to need far more capital than we were able to raise as a nonprofit. Our nonprofit is still fully in charge. There is a subsidiary capped profit so that our investors and employees can earn a certain fixed return. And then beyond that, everything else flows to the nonprofit. And the nonprofit is like in voting control, lets us make a bunch of non-standard decisions, can cancel equity, can do a whole bunch of other things, can let us merge with another org, protects us from making decisions that are not in any like shareholders' interest. So I think it's a structure that has been important to a lot of the decisions we've made.
What went into that decision process for taking a leap from nonprofit to capped for-profit? What are the pros and cons you were deciding at the time? I mean, this was 2019.
It was really like to do what we needed to go do. We had tried and failed enough to raise the money as a nonprofit. We didn't see a path forward there. So we needed some of the benefits of capitalism, but not too much. I remember at the time someone said, as a nonprofit, not enough will happen. As a for-profit, too much will happen. So we need this sort of strange intermediate.
Well, you kind of had this offhand comment of you worry about the uncapped companies that play with AGI. Can you elaborate on the worry here? Because AGI, out of all the technologies we have in our hands, has the potential to make, the cap is 100x for OpenAI.
It started as that. It's much, much lower for like new investors now.
AGI can make a lot more than 100x.
For sure.
And so how do you Like, how do you compete? Like, stepping outside of OpenAI, how do you look at a world where Google is playing, where Apple and Meta are playing?
We can't control what other people are going to do. We can try to like build something and talk about it and influence others and provide value and, you know, good systems for the world. But they're going to do what they're going to do. Now, I think right now there's like extremely fast and not super deliberate motion inside of some of these companies. But already I think people are, as they see the rate of progress, already people are grappling with what's at stake here. And I think the better angels are going to win out.
Can you elaborate on that? The better angels of individuals? The individuals within
and
the
companies. But, you know, the incentives of capitalism to create and capture unlimited value, I'm a little afraid of. But again, no, I think no one wants to destroy the world. No one wakes up saying like, today I want to destroy the world. So we've got the Moloch problem. On the other hand, we've got people who are very aware of that. And I think a lot of healthy conversation about how can we collaborate to minimize some of these very scary downsides.
Man. You know, I remember I actually like that. I like the whole idea of having the best of both worlds, because I do like the idea of nonprofits. I was speaking to my wife about that the other day, because it definitely has its pros. But like when you're trying to grow, you can't have a growth company and have a nonprofit. That's not going to work either. So you're getting you're getting a good balance, the pros and the cons of both, and it kind of merges together to where you can pull levers. It's almost like, you know, creating a company that has its checks and balances, if you will. Give me 1 second, guys. My wife's calling me. Hello.
I'm at the coach's office. I'm trying to renew the registration on the car.
Uh-huh.
But they're saying that the car insurance for the car is expired. Do you have the updated information? Insurance?
Yeah, let me find out.
Hold on. You said back in February of last year something happened between the insurance and the car, and that put a suspension on it.
What? Okay. All right. Bye, love you.
Reaching a breaking point. OpenAI now growing frustrated with its obligations to Microsoft. That's according to some reports. For today's Tech Check, our Deirdre Bosa is talking about how this could be a part of a bigger realignment in the industry. Hey, Dee.
Hey, good morning, Carl. So theirs is the most public falling out, but this isn't just about OpenAI and Microsoft. What we're seeing is a much broader realignment, where strategic alliances may end up mattering more than who has the best model. Now you've got big tech, infrastructure players, deep-pocketed investors like SoftBank, all moving, trying to lock in talent and distribution before the next phase of the race begins. And that is what makes the growing OpenAI-Microsoft tension so striking. It was once the AI partnership, widely seen as the most strategic and the best aligned in the industry. Microsoft brought the capital and the data centers. OpenAI brought in the talent and the breakthroughs. But now they're both diversifying. They're increasingly competing with each other as well. Microsoft building its own model, even featuring Elon Musk at its developer conference. That is a signal that it's open to new model partnerships. OpenAI, meanwhile, it's working with Oracle and reportedly Google, pushing for multi-cloud access. It's moving deeper into enterprise and defense. Tens of billions more it's raising as it tries to convert into a for-profit company. That is a move that would give it even greater control over its future, but would also squeeze Microsoft's stake and strategic leverage in the process. Now, since Microsoft first invested $1 billion back in 2019, its own shares have more than tripled. It has since poured in some additional $13 billion in capital. And now, as that stake risks becoming diluted through OpenAI's for-profit conversion, the question is really whether Microsoft's early bet still gives it enough leverage in what comes next. Going back to that first partnership announcement, guys, it's very interesting to see how much AGI, artificial general intelligence, the next leg of this race, how much that factors in. Because the deal included a clause that once OpenAI declares AGI, the partnership ends. So maybe it's no coincidence that this year Sam Altman keeps talking about it, how close they are. That could be a negotiating tool. It could be a deadline. It could even be a way to reset the terms entirely. But I think it's clear we
messed up my whole setup because my wife called me with an emergency that she needed her car insurance. She can't find it. So had to fix that real quick. Let me fix what I did here, whatever the hell I did here. There you go. All right, we're back. So because of this reshaping of their entities, it's bringing problems with Microsoft, between OpenAI and Microsoft. And Sam Altman, I'm telling you, it's starting to get mafioso. You got people offering $100 million in a bonus to recruit engineers that work at OpenAI. They're $100 million. It's got to be Einstein of AI. And then you got this restructuring of OpenAI's entity as an entity. And then you have Microsoft getting pissed off because we gave y'all $1 billion. Man, this is OpenAI got to be worth a damn trillion already. This is insane. And then, Sam Altman, when you are doing crazy shit like Sam, you're going to have problems with people. Even if you don't ask for it. Even if you're just trying to do what's the best of what you're responsible for. It's going to ruffle some feathers. And so Elon has publicly criticized Sam Altman because I don't know if you guys know this, but Elon co-founded OpenAI in 2015 with Sam Altman, aiming to make AI development safe, transparent, and open source. And so criticism from Musk says OpenAI has strayed from its mission by becoming a for-profit company and aligning closely with Microsoft, one of its biggest investors. And so this is the quote: OpenAI was created as an open source, which is why I named it OpenAI. Damn. Now it's a closed source, maximum profit company effectively controlled by Microsoft. And so Elon Musk is arguing because they want safety. And I think both of them are saying the same thing. It's just Sam is like, look, we can get safety by still having control as a nonprofit, but still getting the growth of capitalism. But Musk doesn't obviously think that you need to go that route. Especially, all of these guys are rich as shit. All of them. Musk argues that OpenAI under Altman has become opaque and corporate rather than transparent and community-driven as originally intended. He has expressed concern that powerful AI systems like GPT are being trained in secret with unknown safety measures or oversight. Damn. If you guys remember, in 2023, Sam Altman was briefly fired and reinstated by OpenAI's board. Musk criticized the lack of accountability and the internal chaos this revealed. Musk also raised questions about the role of the board, ethics, and safety priorities, suggesting poor governance. He thinks this GTP is a danger to humanity. And so Elon launched XAI in 2023 to directly compete with OpenAI. He said his mission is to understand the true nature of the universe and build truthful AI, a dig at what he says as biased outputs from OpenAI's models. He also created Grok, a chatbot built into X, formerly Twitter, to rival ChatGPT. Personal tensions. And then Musk and Altman had an increasingly strained relationship. Altman has taken subtle jabs at Musk, calling him a jerk in an interview, but also saying he admires him. Musk has responded coldly, even suggesting in interviews that Altman was compromised by corporate interests. Shit. And, some people say Elon is compromised by corporate interests. What do y'all think?
We haven't seen the end of this tension anywhere close to it yet.
Caesar, I meant to answer your question, but I couldn't get it on the chat. Bossy, what drives you to learn more and more each day? I'm just fascinated by the world. I just think God created all of this, and it's fascinating, and I just want to learn. And I want to experience as much as I can and be the best person that I can be, till it's my time. Because I'm trying to enter the kingdom with all this arsenal. You feel me?
That doesn't say great things about what an empirical, truthful landmark of AGI, when it might come, right? If he's using this as a chip.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. And I think that there's a lot of growing evidence that we may be further away than we even thought. There was that Apple paper on reasoning models, throwing a little bit of cold water on how smart they actually are. They're not the only ones. Anthropic has thrown cold water, a Chinese lab as well. That kind of goes against the idea that we are close to AGI because the models, they break down after a certain point. But clearly, it would be in Sam Altman's incentive. He has a real incentive to say that they're close because it changes this whole Microsoft partnership that is breaking into the open now, some of the cracks in it.
Do they just not need them as much anymore?
Yeah, I think there's a huge realignment taking place. They need capital, right? And Masa-san at SoftBank has a lot to provide. I mean, they can partner with Google, which they reportedly are. And it may also show on the Microsoft side how they're looking ahead to the next leg of the race, that maybe they're not willing to spend as much. Maybe they want to be a little more cautious in terms of CapEx. They don't want to keep pouring money into OpenAI, which is still losing money, right? So it says a lot about where each of them stand and where they think that this race is going.
Isn't Anthropic profitable? Let me see. Oh no, it's not profitable yet. It's doing $3 billion a year though. But that's because it's growth. It's a growth company. You can't tell me this shit ain't gonna be profitable. All right, let's check this out. We got some stocks, some AI stocks that are overlooked.
According to the Bank of America Global Fund Manager Survey, Long Mag 7 is one of the most crowded trades on Wall Street. But my next guest has some alternative ways to play artificial intelligence. I want to bring in Dan Newman, who is the Futurum CEO. Great to have you here back in studio with us.
Hey, Brad, good to see you.
So let's talk about this, because a lot of people have already piled into Mag 7, but you believe that there are other places that are non-Mag 7 that they could find some exposure to generative AI and this broader kind of thesis that's driven the market for the past 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's been nothing that is, deemed more attention than AI. You've seen just the news in the last couple of days, whether it's Microsoft Meta offering hundreds of millions of dollars to potential researchers to join their AI talent team. Or, you saw Marvell came out yesterday with the custom AI silicon roadmap, and their stock is popping. We could probably talk a little bit about that. But you're seeing it really across the board. And then, of course, so many people have kind of felt like, well, did I miss NVIDIA? And so the question I get asked most by clients, by retail investors, and why we basically launched the Futurum AI 15, which is the extended list beyond, is what else is out there besides maybe NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Meta? What are the plays, And so you hear about kind of what are the difference makers. So for instance, companies like Avago, Broadcom.
Right.
There's a $500 billion TAM, we believe, in the next 4 years for custom AI silicon. NVIDIA is going to get a lot of that. NVIDIA gets 92% of that market right now, we believe.
Right.
But they're not going to keep 92% in our opinion. They're probably going to fall to maybe 80%, 70%. So it still means NVIDIA, by the way, can triple to 300 billion. There's going to be 100 billion that's going to go into custom. And so we have Avago, for instance, as our number 2 name to play, because that $100 billion opportunity, that sits with the Google custom chips they're doing. It sits with custom chips that companies like OpenAI are planning to do. So that's one of the plays. Of course, you've seen, Brad, TSMC. TSMC, people think about it as a foundry, and of course it's a very big name. And there's a lot of dollars invested in it right now, but people don't always make that connection.
We own it, man.
Whether it's NVIDIA making chips, Meta making chips, Microsoft and Amazon doing their custom chips, all of them are dependent right now on TSMC. And as much as I think the US needs a strong Intel, we aren't there yet. So right now, TSMC has all the pricing power, so it sits at the very top of our list. And then there's some eclectic names. I'll pause here, but basically
he's got
to share Oracle.
He's got to share the cons of TSMC. 3 to 5 years, they might not be the top dogs. Maybe, but it's going to get competitive.
We put on there, you saw what a pop they've gotten, but they've absolutely nailed this AI transformation, and they are in a perfect position. And just yesterday, xAI and Oracle made a big announcement together that they're going to be using Oracle's infrastructure to train xAI models.
Right. So even within that, and I'm glad you brought up Oracle, because that's where I wanted to go next, especially as we were looking at the board there a moment ago with, I believe it was Oracle, we had Salesforce on there, I think Snowflake was on there as well. There we go, for our viewers. And I'm bringing them up because all of them are talking about agentic AI.
I'm not I don't love Salesforce, even though it's it is what it is. It's a good company, and it's been a good company. Oracle, I definitely got to add to my list here, and I'm gonna put Snowflake on here too. Freak it, we'll put Salesforce. I like Qualcomm as well. Damn, I'm over here destroying this. All right, so I got all of these written down because I'm gonna run them through my my AI bot, my investing bot, to see what it thinks.
What it could mean for specific industries. I believe Deloitte came out this morning and projected it could be $150 billion for the telecom industry alone. So for all of what we're hearing around agentic AI, who are kind of the top picks around that as the non-Mag 7, but top 15 of your kind of viewpoint within that specific kind of subsector within this AI play right now?
Yeah, so you saw Oracle on there, and that, of course, we hit on that one. They will do agents on top of their software database stacks. They've done very well in that space. Salesforce is a name that comes up, and we really like it. Now, it's controversial, because there are some people that kind of think the SaaS play is at risk. Satya Nadella came out and called SaaS basically deprecated CRUD databases with logic on top of them. And by the way, he was saying that in respect to their own software, they have a whole SaaS offering in business in their Dynamics suite. So he was actually, sometimes being able to disrupt yourself first is a really critical moment. We see this in every industry right now. But Salesforce has this really deeply entrenched user base of its CRM. Right. Huge customer base. And we believe that a lot of companies are going to maybe look at those customer service workflows first, marketing workflows first, and sales workflows where an agent can do customer outreach. It can do follow-up. It can recommend to a sales team what's the next best action to keep a deal in progress. So things like that are why companies like Salesforce made it onto our list, because we think those are the agent use cases that are going to drive immediate efficiency and productivity. And by the way, $150 billion for telcos conservative. I mean, we see a $20 trillion productivity gain by the end of the decade, and we see something like $5 to $6 trillion of cost takeouts. Now, this goes back to the Amazon comments that came yesterday from CEO Andy Jassy talking about jobs and the impact. I mean, it's coming for jobs on both ends. It's coming in robotics in the warehouse. It's also coming for those knowledge worker jobs. So agents will bring efficiency first, prune to grow.
One of the other areas as well, and this is one of the kind of top spots that we know our viewers are hitting when it comes to the private market data on Yahoo Finance, it's OpenAI. And the speed with which they're not only able to garner some of the investments from publicly traded companies that we're talking about here now, but also government contracts, which is a new effort for them going forward. What's the significance of them being able to hit some of these milestones in stride, and what that means for the rest of the publicly market and publicly traded entities right now in the market?
Well, I mean, I know we are in this conflict moment with Iran, Israel, and the U.S. kind of sitting on the edge of it and potentially coming in. And this, of course, brings a lot of attention to defense. I talked about how AI is a defense and a growth trade. If you look at its deflationary impacts and you look at companies like Palantir that sits at number 3 on our AI 15 list, is because they have this unique ability to contract the government, and we all know how much defense spending can impact the success of a tech company. Oracle was another one that did very well in that particular era. So we go back to OpenAI, and OpenAI is saying, hey, here's a massive TAM for us to explore. We are seen as the world's leading researcher in AI. We could potentially partner with other private market companies like Anduril. We've seen there's been some opportunities for those kinds of partnerships to build something that the government can benefit from. But just Palantir alone and the way the market has responded to the conflict. And the stock keeps going up. Growth usually takes a hit, Brad, when the markets are worried about us going to war. The market has been incredibly resilient, and a lot of these growth in AI names that we see, again, I keep mentioning Oracle, but Oracle, Palantir, Avago, they're seeing growth and they're going up. And just yesterday, the Marvell note, which isn't on our 15, but with that $100 billion TAM for custom chips, you're seeing that the market sees massive opportunity. And of course, the defense sector is going to continue to spend big, and AI will accelerate the innovation in that area.
Good stuff.
You went into great detail.
Now, Now we need to look at. All right, so I completely agree. We already knew about a bunch of these companies, but I'm gonna keep watching A-Lab, Oracle, Snow, CRM, QCOM. I'm gonna check those out a little bit deeper. That way, I get a broader sense of what's who's moving where, and we get a sense of the overall AI industry. But the Federal Reserve, they made it their announcements today. So let's take a look at this. And he's live right now, but I'm just gonna watch after the live stream.
Jonathan Krinsky says the potential for a pullback is elevated. Tom Lee says stocks are going to rally post FOMC. What do you think?
So I think as we move towards the end of the second quarter and mid-year, you have this looming battle between resiliency and complacency. Do we have a resilient market, or is there too much complacency in the market?
It can be both.
I'm in the
we do have a resilient market. You could still have complacency.
Well, but think about from a perspective of positioning. If you're in the resilient, I don't think you could be in both camps in terms of positioning. I'm in the resiliency camp. I think this is a resilient market, and we continue to march higher towards the all-time highs. The problem and the challenge, as I see it when I do the analysis for myself, is now we're heading into a moment in the calendar where you lose the buybacks. You know that the 90-day extension on the tariffs, that's coming to ultimately an end. And then you have this FOMC meeting this afternoon. And I think that everyone is really treating this meeting with a degree of, oh, okay, it's just going to be a boring meeting. Nothing's really going to happen. If Chairman Powell really has a hawkish position, and I can't see why he would move towards a dovish position, if he remains hawkish, I just don't see that being good for markets.
I don't know why he would remain hawkish, Bill. You get jobless claims are elevated. You've had some data points that are weak. Retail sales, biggest drop since March 23. Now you could say, well, that's all pull forward. And maybe it is, we get it. Home builder sentiment is bad. It remains such, even as rates have started to come down a little bit. What do you want to hear today?
I think he has a reason to go dovish. I think the city surprise index has continued to come down, lowest since 2023. But more importantly for me is the Michigan consumer one-year inflation expectations. Now, it is a politically divided survey, and it was leading with the Democrats. It was very high, elevated to 7.3%. And I called that a cycle high. I've been calling that a cycle high for a bit. That May number was revised down to 6.6. The June number just came in at 5.3. And this is important because the Fed believes inflation, consumer inflation expectations are a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think they do believe that amidst tariffs, that inflation could become unhinged because of those expectations, and it's coming down now.
Yeah, I don't see how he, now maybe he does, I don't know, but the economic surprise index, the most negative so far this year.
Agreed.
I mentioned the data points.
Agreed.
Inflation readings of late have been pretty good.
Okay.
So why do you think he would be hawkish in the face of all of that?
Because we still have looming tariffs, and now we have a conflict in the Middle East in which we don't know the result. We don't know where oil price is ultimately going to go. So he has that uncertainty in front of him. I'm not sure his disposition can move towards being dovish. I think that the eco data is suggesting that he should make that pivot towards being dovish. I see that we have an economy that is beginning to slow from a higher level, but I think there is too much uncertainty in terms of the policy in front of him for him to move in that direction.
I don't even know if uncertainty equates to being hawkish. It just is what it is. What do you think?
I mean, I can make a case that we're already too restrictive and that we should be cutting this week. Now, that's not going to happen, and I in no way, shape, or form am expecting that because of the tariffs, because of the bump in oil. But if not for that, you look at this market and you can make a great case that we should at least be having a conversation about rate cuts. We also get a dot plot this week, which will be super exciting for those of you at home that pay attention. And if that's only one cut in the dot plot, I think the market's going to be very, very negative. If it's two, I doubt it would be a positive catalyst. I think that's already priced in.
Yeah, well, we are going to get the outlook, so that's going to be key. Steve Weiss joining us today from the hole in Alcatraz, obviously. Nice backdrop. What did you do to get put in there, Weiss?
You know, I'm actually sitting in the office of one of our portfolio companies, Nibble Robotics, that's fully automated.
Do they
warehouse.
make bricks?
They
Okay,
don't
get the
make
joke.
bricks, but they have very austere, which we like to see from companies, not building monuments but working out of austere surroundings. So what you don't see is the 100 engineers working here. But here's
All
a
right,
data
we'll take your
point.
word for it.
Yeah, here's a data point that hasn't come through. Nimble's costs for aluminum, which they used to source from China, went up 50%. So they now source completely from the U.S. What they're able to do is save a little bit. So their costs are still up on aluminum, forgetting about all the other raw materials, 35% year over year. Now, this is just one company. So I would go back to what Joe said, and there's another category, and the other categories which I'm in is resilient but very nervous because of where we are. We're at elevated valuations on the market. I don't think that inflation, I think the market's been very sanguine about inflation based upon the last two reports, but I think that's coming to an end and quickly because inventories that were not tariffed are petering out, and now you're going to have to pay the higher prices going forward. And you're right, Scott, there's no basis for Powell to be hawkish in this report, and they do have a very, very tough situation. They're not going to predict war, so I don't think they're going to talk about war in terms of what it would do to oil prices, which just spike them up, nor will oil prices rising be a demand factor, so it won't be indicative of a stronger economy. So I think basically it's status quo. I think the dot plots don't really change, and I think if the market sells off because of one dot instead of two cuts, that you'll see a snapback rally. This is a market that just has pure momentum. It's got momentum in basically every sector. We're seeing the appetite for IPOs, and I think remains strong until we get to the second quarter earnings report. And I think that's going to be the tell on the market. Will it continue to be resilient, or is it going to give back some of the gains? I'm sort of in the latter camp, but then again, with the companies I own, I'm not really positioning differently because they're permanent compounders for the most part. On the edges, I may make some changes, but otherwise I'm staying where I am.
The status quo comment implies that we could hear uncertainty and patience a lot today as Steve Leisman's sitting in the room later listening to Chair Powell. So what is the over-under, do you think, on the number of times we're going to hear uncertainty or patient today, Steve?
I think it was 9 in the last one, but I just love this conversation. You, Scott, just engineered a perfect stagflationary conversation, which is almost precisely what's probably going on around the table at the Fed right now. You have guys like you, Wapner, who said, hey, look at the claims number, look at the housing number. How can we not be cutting? And then other people come back and say, yeah, but you have the inflation problem, the tariff issue coming potentially down the road. Which should we address? Interesting to go back and look at both the number and the change in the March forecast, Scott. And that was that initial stab or step towards stagflation. Look at that. The core PCE went up by 0.3. Real GDP went down by 0.4. And what did they do with the funds rate? Well, they kept it unchanged, 3.9%. One other thing that I'm going to be looking at today, Scott, we don't talk a lot about this. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but how certain or confident is the Fed? If you look at their own measure of what they say they don't know, or their own measure of confidence in their, for example, their core PCE number, take a look here. The number is 0.89. That's their uncertainty, where 1 is maximum uncertainty. 1 means that every official is more uncertain than usual. Where are they? They're just a tick below they were with the pandemic. They're a tick above where they were during the great financial crisis. When do you think the Fed's going to cut? Well, watch when that number comes down, when the Fed gets more clear about the outlook. So I would say if the president wants the Fed chair to cut, maybe call him stupid less and create more clarity in the tariff outlook and the regime more.
Well, just that, what you showed, that chart just underscores why some think that the dot plot in and of itself, or even right now, is comical because it virtually means nothing. Like, what difference does it make that you have the median Fed person saying, well, we have 2 cuts coming this year, while at the same time you've got Powell saying 4,000 times uncertainty, uncertainty, patience, patience, patience. How can both coexist?
Well, I think what you want to know, Scott, and that's why we are able to do interviews with Fed officials, why they talk publicly, is what underlies that outlook. When they say 2 rate cuts, is it expecting that the tariff inflation will pass through the economy, be a one-time event? Is it an expectation that the job market will weaken? Is it an expectation that they need to get back to neutral, or will there be something more that they need to do here? And that's why I think what's been interesting is to watch the job market, which did have a decent number the last time around, but you had those big downward revisions. You've had claims tick up 240, 250. That's a higher number, but it's not an especially worrisome number. When I look back at the history, Scott, 300,000 seems to be a number that is more concerning and indicative of the employment market about to roll over.
Yeah. All right, Steve, we'll see you in a bit in the room where it all happens, and we'll talk afterwards, of course, as we always do, as Gunlock's.
Yeah, so there's that. And then Jerome Powell, he made a statement after they decided to not change the rates, which we expected. If you've been following my live streams, you've been watching the weekly reports and stuff, we expected all of this. So that's why we've been invested. That's why, I just closed some positions in the last few days and opened new ones, because we kind of expect what's happening, and nothing that's happening in the world is impactful enough to affect that. Not even what's going on with Iran and Israel and the U.S. So when earlier somebody says, "Man, it's about to be World War III," that's just extreme. That's just extreme, and you're buying all of the fear mongering, and that's why a lot of people who aren't actually informed, who just are led by the news and not the numbers, not the data, not sentiment. And I'm not saying that that's the all on be all. Like, you have to, obviously there's always a chance that shit could hit the fan. We've seen it twice in the last couple of months. Things we didn't expect. The stock market comes crashing down 20-30%, right? But the point is to stay in long enough to continue to grow, because we know long term we grow, right? Let's see what Jerome Powell had to say after making his decision.
My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has come down a great deal, but has been running somewhat above our 2% longer run objective. In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Following growth of 2.5% last year, GDP was reported to have edged down in the first quarter, reflecting swings in net exports that were driven by businesses bringing in imports ahead of potential tariffs. This unusual swing has complicated GDP measurement. Private domestic final purchases, or PDFP as we call them, which excludes net exports, inventory investment, and government spending, grew at a solid 2.5% rate. Within PDFP, growth of consumer spending moderated, while investment in equipment and intangibles rebounded from weakness in the fourth quarter. Surveys of households and businesses, however, report a decline in sentiment over recent months and elevated uncertainty about the economic outlook, largely reflecting trade policy concerns. It remains to be seen how these developments might affect future spending and investment. In our summary of economic projections, the median participant projects GDP to rise 1.4% this year and 1.6% next year, somewhat slower than projected in March. In the labor market, conditions have remained solid. Payroll job gains averaged 135,000 per month over the past 3 months. The unemployment rate, at 4.2%, remains low and has stayed in a narrow range for the past year. Wage growth has continued to moderate while still outpacing inflation. Overall, a wide set of indicators suggests that conditions in the labor market are broadly in balance and consistent with maximum employment. the labor market is not a source of significant inflationary pressures. The median projection for the unemployment rate in the SEP is 4.5% at the end of this year and next, a bit higher than projected in March. Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index and other data indicate that total PCE prices rose 2.3% over the 12 months ending in May, and that, excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.6%. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up over recent months, as reflected in both market and survey-based measures. Respondents to surveys of consumers, businesses, and professional forecasters point to tariffs as the driving factor. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. The median projection in the SEP for total PCE inflation this year is 3%, somewhat higher than projected in March. The median inflation projection falls to 2.4% in 2026 and 2.1% in 2027. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. At today's meeting, the committee decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5% and to continue reducing the size of our balance sheet. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Changes to trade, immigration, fiscal, and regulatory policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. The effects of tariffs will depend, among other things, on their ultimate level. Expectations of that level, and thus of the related economic effects, reached a peak in April and have since declined. Even so, increases in tariffs this year are likely to push up prices and weigh on economic activity. The effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. It's also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent. Avoiding that outcome will depend on the size of the tariff effects, on how long it takes for them to pass through fully into prices, and ultimately on keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored and to prevent a one-time increase in the price level from becoming an ongoing inflation problem. As we act to meet that obligation, we will balance our maximum employment and price stability mandates, keeping in mind that without price stability, we cannot achieve the long periods of strong labor market conditions that benefit all Americans. We may find ourselves in the challenging scenario in which our dual mandate goals are in tension. If that were to occur, we would consider how far the economy is from each goal and the potentially different time horizons over which those respective gaps would be anticipated to close. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait to learn more about the likely course of the economy before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward. The median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 3.9% at the end of this year, the same as projected in March. The median projection declines to 3.6% at the end of next year and to 3.4% at the end of 2027, a little higher than the March projection. These individual forecasts are always subject to uncertainty, and as I've noted, uncertainty is unusually elevated.
He has to.
And of course, these projections are not a committee.
Because if he doesn't read word for word, it could literally affect the market.
Plan or decision. At this meeting, the committee continued its discussions as part of our 5-year review of our monetary policy framework. We focused on issues related to assessing the risks and uncertainties that are relevant for monetary policy and the potential implications for policy strategy and communications. Our review includes outreach and public events involving a wide range of parties, including Fed Listens events around the country and a research conference that we held last month. We are open to new ideas and critical feedback, and we will take on board lessons of the last 5 years in determining our findings. We intend to wrap up any modifications to our statement on longer-run goals and monetary policy strategy by late summer. After that, we will consider enhancements to our suite of communications tools, including the SEP. The Fed has been assigned 2 goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission, and we at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
All right. Well, we're not going to get any questions, but so no, it's what we expected. We starting to get pretty good at this, man. Christian had a question. Hey, Bob, so would love your input. What you think about partnerships and opening a barbershop? Well, depends on the business model, right? Most booth rent shops, if you are completely full, you can make 5 to 10K a month. On average, my shops make about 7K, about 7,500 a month on average. Okay, that's booth rent. Let me rewrite that. Okay, that's booth rent. Well, if you have a partner, you're probably not going to make this the first year you're in business. Probably after that. And if you put, let's say, 50 to 100, sometimes 150,000, depending on the shop, right? When are you going to be able to pay yourself back? And then when you do pay yourself back, how are you guys going to split the profits? It's not a big business. It's not like partnering up with a restaurant that could potentially do 100,000, do 20,000 a month, 30,000 a month, 50,000 a month, 100,000 a month, right? Now, if it's a commission model, there's some room there. What I would suggest is, if this is one location, what is the overall vision? What kind of pie are you guys building? Okay. And that pie might be 5 years out. It's got to be a good plan here. Number one. Number two, I like smart money, which means they have to bring something to the table other than money. Because once they give you your money and you continue to work with them and they don't do anything for the business to help the business grow, then they just become an anchor to your leg. For that, just get with a bank. If you know how to deal with banks, right? Open your shop. And when you pay the bank off, guess what? They're gone. And you keep 100% of this. Because banks aren't smart money. They're not going to help you become a profitable business. But if you're going to partner with somebody and they're not smart money, then you might as well just partner with a bank. Because then at least they're not tied to your ankle for the rest of owning that business. And trust me, a divorce in business is not good. It's ugly. So as long as the partner, so as long as you guys know what the vision is, what kind of pie you're going to make, right? If every piece seems like something worth working towards in the long term, and they're going to bring something more than just money, then do the partnership. I would get with a business attorney. I would make sure that you have an operating agreement drawn up. An operating agreement. Just to have each other's back. Because it's not about just, trusting somebody. It's anything can happen. They can get hit by a bus tomorrow. What happens to their cut? Does it go to the wife? Is there a key man insurance? One of the things that we do is, and we raise this every year, is we get what's called key man insurance. So you guys can actually read it. Key man insurance. And let's say you guys think the barbershop business is worth $500,000 now. And if he was to get hit by a bus or you were to get hit by a bus, half of that is $250K. That should go to the wife or significant other, because I didn't get into business with the wife. I got into the business with the husband, right? Vice versa. So we would know that if something was to happen, that $250K would go towards the wife, and the entire that's pretty much buying the other half of the pie. Okay? You got to think of these things as you're doing a partnership. And so what I suggest is get with a business attorney, because they've seen the good, the bad, the ugly in business, and they'll be able to walk you through as a middleman that's giving you guys advice to protect the both of y'all, right? Hope that helps. And that's what I think about partnering with people in business. Thank God all my partnerships have been amazing. Number one. Number two, I believe in giving equity to your guys, to your leadership team, as the business continues to grow, because you want them to feel like, damn, they built this, they should get a piece of it as well. With all the turmoil going on in the world, would I short? Hell no. I'm actually, I do the opposite. I sell the insurance for people who short. I sell puts. I play the other side. My entire investing strategy is free on YouTube. Just look up Basio Stock Investing course. It's an 8-part series, and I break it down to you. So what kind of things should the partner bring to the table aside from money? Yeah, it depends. You want them to be, the yin and yang, right? So if you're really good at, let's say you got one guy who I don't know, he's going to handle the accounting and he's good with numbers and all that stuff. Got great credit, whatever it may be. And you don't have the best credit, but you're going to hire everybody. You have the network of barbers, you know how to build the shop and run it. You have your administrative work, and then you have your hands-on work. You have your leadership. It's who's going to lead the shop? Who's going to be the CEO, in a sense? Who's going to be you have CEOs, you have COOs, you have CMOs. Who's going to do the marketing? Who's going to handle marketing? Who's going to handle, there's, those, what are the strengths and weaknesses? Because if this person that you want to open a barbershop with only knows how to cut hair, all they're bringing to the table is cutting hair, that helps them. You don't need to go into business with somebody just because they can cut hair good. Do you know how to run ads? Will you go get the signs made? Will you go get marketing materials done? Like, how much time can you put into the business aside from just cutting hair, right? There's a difference between working on your business behind the chair and working on the barbershop's business. So, man, if you're thinking about opening a shop, I highly suggest, bro, spend the $120, join 6FB mentorship, cancel anytime, and learn some shit, bro. There's a plethora of information on there. It's a freaking fraction of an investment based on what you're talking about getting into, which is opening a business. Way more risk in opening a business without feeling conviction and well informed than the risk of losing $120. So, all right. I want to watch this. Johnson & Johnson says we're in the golden era. How many CEOs keep saying we're in the golden era? That's why I'm not shorting no damn stocks. What? Hell no.
The center of the action of our research and development organization, which is the lifeblood of a company like Johnson & Johnson. So here we have about 2,500 scientists and researchers that are connected with the rest of our R&D organization.
Joaquin Duato is chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, one of the largest drug makers in the world. We met with him at his firm's research center in Springhouse, New Jersey, to learn how a major pharmaceutical company develops cutting-edge drugs.
It started with a smaller campus, and gradually we have expanded it, as you can see, into a large campus in a very beautiful location too.
For Duato, there has never been a better time to be in the business of health science innovation.
We are in a golden...
Because of AI. What AI is doing for medicine is it's going to make medicines in 100th of the time. It's incredible. Like, if y'all ever go through that rabbit hole, life expectancy is going to grow for humans because of AI. We're going to lose jobs. You're going to lose stupid jobs. But people's productivity, their wealth, their health, everything is going to grow because of AI.
Era of life science innovation, of medical innovation. And that's the convergence of two forces. On one side, we have a better understanding of the biology of diseases, of the underpinnings of disease. And on the other hand, we have technology, AI, machine learning, that gives us the opportunity to manage large amounts of data and gain insights for that. So all these factors combined create the type of progress that we see. And the US is the country that today has a lead over the rest of the world in life science innovation.
It is no coincidence that the U.S. leads the world in biotech innovation. In 2021, a Congressional Budget Office study reported that the industry was investing over $80 billion a year, up by a factor of 10 over 10 years, amounting to some 25% of pharma companies' revenues, a much larger portion than for other industries. It's not just the money being spent in the United States. It's also the way the government, academia, and the private sector have worked together.
You don't have places which are hubs of life science innovation like Boston or San Francisco, anywhere else in the world. Everybody is looking with envy to the type of ecosystem that we have in the US. Great invested in basic research through academic institutions and hospitals, venture capital that flows into the life science sector, great companies that are able to develop those technologies, manufacture them and bring them to patients, protection of intellectual property, a market that rewards innovation. That combination, it's a uniquely American combination.
Individual companies like J&J have also created their own complex structures to seek out innovation wherever it is and develop it.
We work very hard in order to work and scout the world to see when and where are innovations and technologies that are promising that could eventually benefiting of our scale in research, in development, in manufacturing, and in commercialization. And that's how we have been able to encounter, to find significant innovations that were at an emerging state, still far from getting into patients, and ultimately get them into patients.
An example is icotrokinra, an oral medicine Johnson & Johnson is developing to treat the skin disease plaque psoriasis.
So what are autoimmune diseases? Diseases in which your own immune system turns against you. Having an oral therapy was going to expand the pool of patients that were going to be able to treat it with this medication. So we work and we scout the world to see, are there any company out there that is going to have an oral medication with comparable safety and efficacy to these injectable biologics? And we identified one company. And they had a molecule that still was preclinical, meaning it had not been yet used in patients. So we brought it here to Springhouse. And in Springhouse, we work in making sure that the drug was stable in the digestive tract, that it had the right potency, and we actually built a medicine that is an oral medicine with similar efficacy to biologics that went to the clinic. We had the clinical trials, very successful, showing this comparable efficacy, and pretty soon, in the second half of the year, we're going to be able to file it for the FDA in psoriasis and get to patients next year.
How big could this be?
So this is going to be one of our biggest breakthroughs for Johnson & Johnson and for our growth in the second half of the decade.
Wow. Big pharmaceutical companies like Johnson & Johnson are spending record amounts of money to discover and develop new medicines. It has invested some $50 billion in R&D and M&A since the beginning of last year. But they're far from the only ones. Zara Moradali represents venture capital firms in biotech as head of Grant Thornton's Life Sciences Industry Practice.
So when you think about big pharma and you look at data from 2015 through 2021, The drugs that were developed internally and FDA approved was less than 30% by Big Pharma, and the rest of it was external. For some companies, that percentage was 80%, and for others, it was zero.
In looking for those opportunities to invest in the innovative culture found in the labs, Muradali looks for three things: the people, the science, and patience.
When you think about science, it's challenging. It's hard, and you know, when you think about the failures in R&D, I mean, that's to be expected. And any investor should be patient, and they should have a time horizon of like 10 to 15 years to see a drug from discovery to commercialization. It's not easy. Science is difficult.
Duato respects how difficult the discipline is, regardless of size or scale. And of course, we can't talk about innovation in just about any part of the economy without turning to artificial intelligence and what it will mean for scientific discovery. We saw it firsthand at J&J as they used it to screen millions of compounds.
How long does it take you to screen the whole 1.7 million?
We can screen one compound every 2 to 3 seconds. So we can screen this whole entire 1.7 million compounds in roughly 5 to 10 days, depending on the target.
Wow.
So
you could shoot 1.7 million compounds in 5 to 10 days. Does this go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Yes, it can. Yeah.
So what used to take us months now take us days, no?
Yes.
So this is a way of accelerating the number of compounds and also the time it takes us to have lead compounds. And then we have other platforms that assess to what extent they are going to be viable. Are they going to have any toxicities? What is the biological effect?
But what form does the output of this have? I mean, is it data? It's
the data.
It's the data. So in the past, analyzing all these millions of data points would have been very difficult for researchers.
Yes.
Now they have the underlying models that are going to drive the insights for them. So we accelerate the screening and also the analytical part. So the AI is a tool.
Yeah.
The data is proprietary. And then also the interpretation of the insights coming from the AI, it's what our scientists and researchers do. So while, yes, technology is important, ultimately it comes down to our data and to our researchers to what extent we can accelerate progress.
Handling all the data is a big opportunity, but also a big challenge, particularly for early-stage biotech firms, leading some to partner up.
Does that, all things being equal, over time, give Big Pharma something of an edge because it typically has access to more data?
I mean, it might be, and that is where we're seeing collaboration agreements with companies that are AI-first companies with Big Pharma, and you're seeing activities in that space as well. You've got this right. I mean, that's where the flow of money in the future will be.
And then there's the role of the government in giving incentives for biotech innovation and in creating the overall environment where it can thrive. Tim Sullivan is CEO of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority.
It's a crowded field, but New Jersey, I think, stands toward the top of that field, largely because of the investments that Governor Murphy has made in growing that innovation ecosystem. So we have an...
Like I said, bro, even Johnson & Johnson, for example, is potentially a growth company at this point. We'll see. We got to look into it. We got to follow it. But it's crazy to hear that, because AI is making everything more productive. Now, with that being said, going back to the Iran topic, the exiled crown prince of Iran speaks on this Iranian regime. Let's see what he has to say.
And we begin this Sunday morning on day 3 of Israel's war with Iran and Iranian retaliation fired overnight. 10 Israeli civilians killed last night as Iran targeted neighborhoods, and Israel continues its massacre on military infrastructure in Iran and Iran's ability to make a nuclear bomb. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the operation to remove the Iranian threat to Israel will last, quote, as many days as it takes. Earlier, an Israeli official saying Israel had planned a 2-week operation to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities. The Israeli attack beginning before dawn on Friday, when Israel launched waves of strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities and its leadership, taking out the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard and 3 other major generals, along with 9+ scientists working on Iran's primary nuclear sites throughout the country. Israel saying 3 out of 4 of Iran's nuclear facilities have been diminished or destroyed, as Israel struck so far 250 targets and 720 components. A major nuclear facility still exists in Iran underground with enriched uranium. Iran is firing back and has picked up the retaliation overnight and the weekend. First, sending 200 missiles into Israel, killing 3 people on Saturday and then another 10 last night. The Israeli defense minister said yesterday Tehran will burn if it continues to fire missiles at Israel. Here's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday.
We paved the way to Tehran, and our pilots over the skies of Tehran will deal blows to the Ayatollah regime that they cannot even imagine. And I can tell you this, we have indications that senior leaders in Iran are already packing their bags. They sense what's coming. I'll tell you what would have come if we hadn't acted. We had information that this unscrupulous regime was planning to give the nuclear weapons that they would develop to their terrorist proxies. That's nuclear terrorism on steroids. That would threaten the entire world.
President Trump has been warning Iran to make a deal on its nuclear ambitions and reiterating that Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb now for several months. Back on April 12th, the president gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal. Israel attacked Iran on day 61, which was this past Friday. And as far back as March of this year, with President Trump in office for the second time just a month and a half, the president told me directly he sent a letter to the Ayatollah Khomeini trying to achieve a peaceful outcome.
The people of Iran are great people, but they had a tough regime, and they'd meet and they'd be shot in the streets. I mean, it was a tough deal. But I would rather negotiate a deal. I'm not sure that everybody agrees with me, but we can make a deal that would be just as good as if you won militarily. But the time is happening now. The time is coming up. Something's going to happen one way or the other. I hope that Iran, and I've written them a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them.
You wrote a letter to the Khomeini,
Yes.
the leader? When did you send the letter?
Yesterday.
And you said you better negotiate, or we want you to
I
negotiate?
didn't say you better. I said,
Okay.
I hope you're going to negotiate, because it's going to be a lot better for Iran. And I think they want to get that letter. The other alternative is we have to do something, because you can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
That was on March 9th. Joining me now from an undisclosed location is the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, His Royal Highness Reza Pahlavi. Your Highness, thank you so much for being here today. What is your reaction to this conflict?
The first thing I need to say here is that my heart goes out to the victims, civilian victims, both in Iran and in Israel, who are unfortunately casualties of this conflict.
Yeah.
But one thing is very clear, and I mentioned that last time we spoke, that this is not the Iranian people's war. It is Ali Khamenei's war, and he's solely and ultimately responsible for having brought this to this stage. What angers me further is that he's using my compatriots as a human shield while he's currently hiding in some underground tunnel like a rat. And we have had reports that senior members and officials have already had their families fleeing the country to foreign destinations, perhaps even including some of his own.
You heard Benjamin Netanyahu say that there are leaders that are packing their bags and leaving. Do you believe that this Iranian regime can be toppled?
Absolutely. It's just a matter of time. I believe that for 44 years. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. But now we have a tremendous opportunity. Last time we spoke, I mentioned that the regime is at its weakest. As of last 3 days, the regime is 10 times weaker than it was 2 weeks ago. So at this stage, I think the Iranian people obviously realize that the playing field has been more equalized for them, to give them finally an opportunity to rise and get rid of this regime. Because we always believe that the ultimate solution to the problem is for this regime to no longer be there. Not at the hand of foreign troops or countries, but at the hand of the Iranian people themselves. The Iranian people are the boots on the ground that we need. What they need, however, is solidarity from the free world to once and for all, get rid of the problem, help Iranians overcome this regime, and put an end to all the threats that this regime has been the root cause of for decades now in the region and beyond.
Do you think the rest of the world, the free world, will heed that call and come to the aid of the Iranian people? What would you like to see?
What I like to see is for the world to know that the only way you can have less stress for the economic stability of the world, have less casualties of innocent victims here and there, have an end to all these threats, including the nuclear threat, is to eliminate this regime. The sooner they come to this conclusion, the sooner we'll be rid of the problem and we can all breathe a sigh of relief. The Iranian people are willing to do their part. In fact, they've done this so many times with no help whatsoever, but they're willing to risk life and limb in order to finally overcome. Last night, people on the streets were angry, chanting death to the dictator yet again. They know who the enemy is. The
They're saying death to Israel too, though.
regime has been giving them slogans of death to America and death to Israel for the past 4 decades. And Iranians have been responding, they lie to us when they say it's America. Our enemy is right here, meaning the regime. And fortunately, I see that more and more people, public opinion, media, and foreign governments are finally making a clear distinction between the people of Iran and the regime. And that's key. That tells you right there that the solution is in front of your eyes. The Iranian people are your solution, not negotiating with a regime that cannot be trusted. Case in point, the latest report of the IAEA. They are not to be trusted. And I've said that so many times already.
And you've said also that the Iranian leadership is at its weakest. How would you assess, based on your own knowledge of this, how would you assess the nuclear capabilities today?
Well, it certainly has been tremendously set back. But the whole point here is that how much more time do you want the regime to catch a second breath and come back online? How many times are we going to yet again throw them a lifeline? How many times are we going to allow them, as they were going down in their ability to spend money on their proxies or for repression machineries at home, to get access to more funding that they shouldn't have had? I think this is the perfect time. The G7 are meeting right now in Canada. Why not prescribe the IRGC, which is the element that has been the root cause of repression at home and terrorism abroad, as part of the kind of pressure that the world can bring? And at the same time have the parallel track, you and I have spoken about this many times already, a parallel process of maximum support. Some people have already been talking about internet interruptions in Iran that the regime has always tried to use as a tactic to make people have more difficulties communicating. Starlink and Elon Musk are trying to do their part. We need much more of that. This is how, in fact, they can help the Iranian people have a better chance to succeed, and their success will be in your own interest at the end of the day.
Your Highness, Iran is apparently reaching out to several countries right now, trying to get a message to Israel to stop and put in some kind of a ceasefire. According to Israeli officials, Iranian leaders are sending messages to Israel through Italy, Azerbaijan, Cyprus. They may be using Qatar and Oman to relay signals to the United States. What is your message to those countries?
I think, again, if the fundamental argument is that the source and the root cause of all the problems and all the threats is directly linked to the survivability or the continued survival of this regime this far, the quickest way to eliminate all these problems is to put an end to this regime. If out of desperation they're begging for yet again another life insurance, I think, they had plenty of opportunity to come clean. And they haven't. And the minute they get a chance, they will go back to their old tricks. They're only trying to buy time. This is a pattern that has been many, many times observed by this regime. Every time their back is to the wall, they try to come across as, okay, now we are willing to consider it. But the minute they get a chance, they go back to their old ways, which is why I'm saying it is not a reliable formula. You will always be in anxiety of how far can we rely on this, how far the negotiation could succeed if they were to resume. And at the end of the day, you still have the same problem in place, because let's say, for the sake of argument, and we talked about this before already, let's say there is a deal on the nuclear issue. What about terrorism? What about funding of the proxies? What about radicalization? What about all the other aspects that this regime has been involved with? What about their funding of radical groups in Europe and in the United States? on university campuses, fomenting all this kind of anti-Semitic rhetoric and whatever we have seen. This is Ali Khamenei's regime yet again. The Iranian people, on the other hand, want to have cordial relationship with our neighbors, whether it's the Israelis or the Saudis or the rest of the Persian Gulf in our neighborhood, because unlike this regime that survive on warmongering and celebrate martyrdom, we want to celebrate peace and brotherhood and life. And that's the difference. Invest on the Iranian people. After 46 years of trying the other way around, give the Iranian people this time a chance to put an end to all the problems. To free themselves, which is my mission in life, to it, but we need the world to understand that which side of history will they be standing on this time.
Your Highness, you wanted to give the people a message in Farsi.
Thank you so much, Maria. همیهنان عزیز، فرصت غنیمت هست که در حال حاضر با عقب نشینی نظام و تضعیف خیلی بیشتر از هر زمانی یک فرصت استثنایی هست که بالاخره کار رو به دست خودتون بگیرید و نبرد نهایی رو
Man. So, you know, came across this video. This whole war is against is not war, but this fight is about nuclear weapons. This fight with Iran. And I see this video that pops up and it goes, how every country got nuclear weapons. Explain. I love this type of shit, man. Let's watch this.
Know the story of how the United States was the first to develop the nuke, but today there are now 10 countries around the world that have successfully created them, some helping each other, but most in secrecy, involving a lot of spying, rivalry, and betrayal. Each of them have a story just as interesting as the US's Manhattan Project, but are rarely told. We're going to go through the full timeline of how the 10 countries raced each other to build this technology, and also the other countries that came close and might soon be added to the list. The story begins in 1938, when German scientists first discovered nuclear fission, the ability to split atoms releasing massive energy through a chain reaction. The following year, Albert Einstein would warn the US of the dangerous possibilities in weaponizing this technology. The United States was famously the first to create nuclear weapons. After a long and secretive operation against the backdrop of the Second World War, scientists from the US, UK, and Canada collaborated in the Manhattan Project. They spent nearly 1% of the US's entire GDP on the effort, as they were racing the Germans, who were also working on their own nuclear program, but to much less success. Germany had surrendered by May 1945, but in July, while President Truman was at the Potsdam Conference with Stalin and Churchill, planning what to do with Germany, Truman was secretly informed that the Trinity test in New Mexico was successful, and they now possessed the most powerful weapon humanity had ever seen. Truman told Stalin that the US was about to use this weapon on the Japanese. Although at the time Stalin was already working on his own nuclear weapons project and had spies within the US's Manhattan Project, internally he was secretly furious that the Americans had beaten them to making this bomb. The following month in August, the US unleashed Fat Man and Little Boy on Japan, forcing their surrender, ending the war, but starting a new race around the world for everyone to catch up. The Soviet Union was second to obtain the technology, having started as early as 1941, after noticing German, British, and American scientists stop publishing papers on nuclear fission. They suspected they were also working on creating weapons. The program was accelerated rapidly after seeing the Americans' nuclear attack on Japan, and while they had a lot of information from spying on the US programs, they were worried of potentially being fed misinformation from double agents. Because of this, they didn't trust the stolen American design, so they still ended up doing a lot of their own research. Using many captured German scientists, they built their own project while also using the United States' designs to check it was correct. Earlier than the US expected, in 1949, the Soviets successfully completed the RDS-1 test in Kazakhstan. The US no longer had the monopoly on this technology, and this would create the Cold War arms race with the United States to stockpile as many nukes as possible. The third country was the United Kingdom. Now, you might assume that the US would have helped them, as they were key allies fighting side by side in both world wars, and in theory, America would want to empower their good friends in Europe, but this was not the case. The UK pioneered a lot of the groundwork on nuclear weapons before the US with a project called Tube Alloys starting in 1940. They did this with the help of German, Austrian, and Polish scientists that were fleeing Germany at the time. But due to limited resources fighting the Second World War, Britain handed over all of their work to the US, merging it with what would become the Manhattan Project and providing a significant amount of research under the Quebec Agreement, stating that the US and UK would share the technology once completed and not use it on each other. But in 1945, when the US successfully tested and used its nukes, they also terminated the agreement and didn't share the final results to Britain, keeping it to themselves. This prompted the UK to resume its own nuclear program, and this was done quickly as they had already done a lot of the work and controlled most of the world's uranium. The UK successfully completed its first test called Operation Hurricane in 1952 at the Montebello Islands just above Australia. Meanwhile, after the Soviets had developed nukes much faster than expected in 1949, the US immediately began work on a newer type called thermonuclear weapons. Unlike the standard atom bomb, which uses fission to split atoms, these use fusion to combine atoms, the same process that happens inside stars, and these are significantly more powerful than atom bombs. Scientists like Oppenheimer, who led the Manhattan Project, warned the US not to develop these because of the extreme danger to mankind and where this nuclear arms race was going. But despite this, President Truman gave the go-ahead to continue. In 1952, the United States successfully completed Ivy Mike, the first test of a hydrogen thermonuclear bomb over 450 times more powerful than the one dropped on Nagasaki. The Soviets then completed theirs in 1955 called the RDS-37, and the UK completed theirs in 1957 called Operation Grapple. Because of this new threat of hydrogen bombs, the US then decided to re-sign a nuclear agreement with the UK the following year in 1958.
This is insane.
The fourth country was France, who already had a few scientists working on the Manhattan Project and started their own nuclear program after World War II, collaborating with Israel, but mainly focusing on energy instead of weapons. That was until after the embarrassment of the Suez Crisis and increasing tensions between the US and Soviets prompted France to want their own deterrent strategy and to retain their place as a great European power. The United States was much more against the idea of France having nukes than Britain, as France had a slightly different policy on how they could be used, so France developed them almost completely independently. The French President Charles de Gaulle spearheaded the effort and stated that nuclear weapons were essential for France to be a truly sovereign and great power. He also wanted strategic independence from NATO and the United States. They sourced uranium from its colonies in Niger, Gabon, and Madagascar, which was a huge help, and despite being in ruins after the Second World War, the French scientists worked tirelessly. They successfully carried out their first test in 1960 called the Jerbois Blue in the French colony of Algeria in the Sahara Desert, and then its first hydrogen bomb in 1968. China would be the fifth country on the list wanting their own nukes as a deterrent against the US. Initially, they received a lot of help from the Soviet Union as they saw China as a useful ally, but as Khrushchev began de-Stalinizing, China's chairman Mao denounced Khrushchev's more cautious approach to the West as being too soft and not in line with the true communist principles. This led to a rift between the two nations as Khrushchev withdrew all its help from the Chinese program, leaving them to do the rest of the work alone. China continued their development with impressive speed, especially considering they were dealing with the challenges of the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution. Significant resources were poured into the effort, and they also discovered large deposits of natural uranium, which massively helped. In 1964, the Chinese successfully detonated their first atomic bomb in the large dried-up lake of the Lop Nor region called Project 596. And only 32 months later, they tested their first hydrogen bomb, which is impressive as this is the fastest any country has ever gone from fission to fusion bombs. The sixth country was Israel, who is the only nation in the world to never actually acknowledge possessing nuclear weapons and have never declared they exist, so nobody knows exactly when or how many were created, but lots of details have leaked. As mentioned, the Israelis were working with the French since the 50s on nuclear energy, and France helped Israel build a secret nuclear facility in the Negev desert, which became a problem in 1963 as US President Kennedy became concerned the Israelis were developing nuclear weapons. JFK was strongly opposed to this and demanded the US be allowed to inspect the facility to ensure it was being used for energy and not bombs. Israel repeatedly denied and delayed the US demands, only allowing careful, staged inspections while concealing hidden underground facilities that were later revealed to be creating weapons. Israeli Prime Minister and founder David Ben-Gurion was reportedly obsessed with obtaining nuclear weapons, and it created a rift with the United States, who weren't close allies at the time. This cooled off as JFK's successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, was much less aggressive on preventing Israel's nuclear weapons program, which is believed to have been completed around 1967. While Israel's nuclear capability
low key, this might be why Kennedy got assassinated. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. There's so many things, so many reasons why they say Kennedy got assassinated, but Kennedy was not afraid of changing the way things were done.
Capabilities had been rumored and speculated all throughout the 60s. The big revelation came later in 1986. Mordecai Vanunu, an Israeli technician who worked at that Negev nuclear research center, fled Israel and leaked to the British press a massive amount of photos he took personally and documents detailing what the facility was really being used for. He was then kidnapped by Israel's Mossad in Rome. After being lured there by a female Mossad agent he believed he was going on a date with, he was then sedated and brought back to Israel, where he was sentenced to 18 years in prison for espionage and treason in a behind closed doors trial. He's currently under significant restrictions to his speech and travel and has been rearrested many times for parole violations, speaking to the press and attempting to leave Israel. It's also believed from his leaks that Israel has developed thermonuclear weapons. The seventh country on the list is India, who, like many others, expressed the need to have this latest technology after the Second World War, mainly for deterrence and protection from Pakistan and China. Research began in the 1940s but would take several decades to complete the process. This was accelerated after India lost a border war with China in the Himalayas in 1962 to stop Chinese aggression. It had first been developing nuclear energy, getting supplies for its reactors from countries like Canada and the US while secretly using them to develop weapons. The first test was successfully completed in 1974, codenamed Smiling Buddha, in the desert of Rajasthan, in which they called a peaceful nuclear explosion. This test drew worldwide condemnation and sanctions, as India was using a Canadian reactor provided for energy purposes and because they refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is where countries agree to set rules to limit the spread and use of such weapons. However, India did deliberately refrain from fully weaponizing the technology into warheads while theoretically researching the means to weaponize in case they needed to in the future. Most Indian politicians were opposed to creating activated nuclear weapons, so it was a slow process that wouldn't be completed until the 90s. The eighth country to develop nuclear weapons was South Africa, which is one of the most unique stories. It possessed one of the world's largest reserves of natural uranium, which is a key ingredient, and had been supplying it to the US, UK, France, and potentially the Soviet Union and Israel, most of which was intended for peaceful energy reactors, but it's likely some also ended up being used for weapons. Since 1948, South Africa had created a nuclear energy program, but by the 1960s and 70s, they shifted interest into weapons due to the increased Soviet influence that was spreading in Namibia and Angola. As well as this, the apartheid regime drew worldwide condemnation, causing South Africa to become politically isolated and without many allies for protection. In 1977, they created a testing facility in its Kalahari desert and nearly detonated a bomb, but when a Soviet satellite spotted it and reported this to the US, the backlash and international pressure stopped the test. In 1979, US satellites detected a double flash of light in the Prince Edward Islands controlled by South Africa in the Indian Ocean. This was called the Vela incident and is widely believed to have been a joint nuclear test by Israel in collaboration with South Africa. They likely allowed Israel to test its weapons there in exchange for South Africa gaining some of this research for its own program, who didn't have functional weapons yet at the time. By the mid-1980s, it had created 6 nuclear bombs, roughly the size of the one dropped on Hiroshima, and it's believed to have achieved this with the help of Israel, likely in exchange for its large uranium supplies. South Africa maintained deliberate ambiguity around its weapons, never admitting to having nukes, similar to Israel, to act as a deterrent from hostile nations. But by the 90s, as the Soviet Union collapsed, its need for protection from communist threats dissipated, and with the apartheid regime coming to an end, it feared handing over nuclear weapons to the next incoming government, so it opted to be the first nation in history to dismantle and dispose of its nukes, and then admitted to the world that it had actually possessed them. The designs were destroyed and the enriched uranium was locked in a nuclear facility vault, although in 2007 armed intruders breached the facility and came close to stealing the materials before being stopped, and there are still fears today about this weaponized uranium falling into the wrong hands. Pakistan would become the 9th country, beginning the process in the 1970s after losing a war with India, their biggest rivals, in 1971, causing East Pakistan to become Bangladesh. Their prime minister said that if India builds the bomb, we will eat grass or leaves, even go hungry, but we will get one of our own. After India conducted its Smiling Buddha test in 1974, the race was on to catch up.
It's crazy because I didn't even know there was a place called Eastern Pakistan till now, and that wasn't that long ago. That's what Bangladesh is now. Crazy how many nations are around that haven't been around that long.
Abdul Qadir Khan was a Pakistani scientist who, while working at the Dutch nuclear facility, stole top-secret intelligence on how to enrich uranium and brought them back to Pakistan, which was a main foundation to their nuclear weapons program. They also had significant help from China, who provided expertise, materials, and blueprints to develop a bomb. This was because China wanted another ally against India, also being one of its rivals, and saw the benefit in arming Pakistan. The US did little to stop Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, initially underestimating their capabilities, but also because Pakistan was a key ally against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The US didn't want to risk their alliance and often turned a blind eye despite mounting evidence that Pakistan were using the US military funding to develop weapons. In 1998, India detonated 5 non-peaceful warheads, including a thermonuclear bomb. Just weeks later, in response, Pakistan also detonated 5 bombs underground in the Rasko mountain range, successfully completing their first ever test and making them the latest nuclear-armed nation. While India operates a no first use policy, meaning they are only for deterrence and to be used in retaliation to such weapons being used on them, Pakistan operates a first use policy, preserving the right to use them however it sees fit, and indicated it would use nukes against India even if no nuclear weapons were used on them. While this policy concerns many nations, it has proved successful for Pakistan, leading to a weaker response from India in their many conflicts since, out of fear of how Pakistan might respond. An Indian military spokesperson said that Pakistan's threat of nuclear first use has deterred India from seriously considering conventional military strikes. Abdul Qadir Khan, the man mentioned earlier for stealing the Dutch nuclear blueprints and dubbed the father of Pakistan's nuclear program, confessed in 2004 that he had been involved in illegally selling nuclear weapons technology to North Korea, Iran, and Libya. Seeing as none of these countries are a part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it drew worldwide concern about the uncontrolled spread of this technology. North Korea became the 10th and final country so far to develop nuclear weapons. The North Korean founder Kim Il-sung saw nuclear weapons as crucial to ensuring his regime's survival and asserting its power to the world to deter longtime rivals South Korea and the US. In the 1950s, the Soviet Union initially helped them develop their first nuclear research facilities for peaceful energy purposes, with many North Korean scientists being trained in the Soviet Union. Both China and the Soviets refused North Korea's many requests to help them develop weapons, and towards the 1970s, North Korea focused on building their own nuclear program using its own large natural uranium deposits, which proved essential as they didn't need to rely on sourcing it from any other country. By the 1980s, the US became aware that North Korea was using spent nuclear energy fuel on creating weapons. Then, in the 90s, North Korea signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, despite secretly building weapons and delaying inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency. In 1994, the US offered them light water reactors which would allow for peaceful nuclear energy production, while making it very difficult to use them for making weapons like their current graphite reactors were. The North Koreans initially agreed to this deal, but it ultimately broke down in 2002 due to a lack of trust between the two countries. The US accused the North Koreans of secretly enriching uranium, violating the agreement. This led North Korea to officially withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and continuing its weapons program. As well as the initial help from the Soviets in the 50s on energy, they also had some limited help from China, but most importantly Pakistan, as mentioned earlier, which was crucial to their development. In 2005, Kim Jong-il claimed to have possessed functional nuclear weapons, and the next year, in October 2006, they completed their first successful nuclear test. Although it was so small at an estimated 0.5 kilotons, experts believed it didn't go off correctly and may have malfunctioned. In 2009, while Kim Jong-il's health was rapidly deteriorating, in what's believed to have been a show of strength, they detonated a second, much more powerful bomb, and a third in 2013. Then in 2016 and 17, it tested its first thermonuclear bombs. Now, while those are the 10 countries that have made their own nuclear weapons, there are lots more that hosted nukes from other countries under alliances for protection and deterrence. During the Cold War, the United States held nuclear weapons in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Turkey, Greece, Denmark's Greenland, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, Canada, Morocco, and Puerto Rico, although some of these were brief and some of them only had vehicles that contained nuclear weapons. Although most of these were removed towards the end of the Cold War, US nukes still remain today in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. The Soviet Union also stored significant amounts in their Soviet republics, with the most being in Ukraine and others being inside Belarus, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, Georgia and Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and as well as briefly in Cuba. All of these were since removed and dismantled with the collapse of the Soviet Union, although in 2023, Russia again provided Belarus with an estimated 130 warheads. There are also several other countries that were working on developing their own nuclear weapons but abandoned the work due to international pressure or lack of resources. These include Argentina, Brazil, Sweden, Romania, Algeria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, Syria, Taiwan, and Japan. Many of these countries were actually very close to successfully developing the technology, notably Iraq, Syria, and Iran, who each made significant progress but all had facilities destroyed or sabotaged by Israeli missiles and cyber attacks.
Oh, shit.
Iran is widely speculated to be the next nation closest to developing nukes, but their rival Israel, being the only nuclear-armed country in the Middle East, is very keen to prevent this. Saudi Arabia's leader Mohammed bin Salman has also said multiple times that without a doubt, if Iran gets them, then they will too. The Saudis are already working on a nuclear energy program and certainly have the funds and means to create weapons. Japan is considered to be one of the most capable countries in the world that could very easily create nuclear weapons if they wanted to. They have some of the most advanced nuclear energy technology and large stockpiles of enriched uranium, but they currently employ a policy of pacifism. Both Argentina and Brazil were also extremely close to completing their development, having created the infrastructure and technology. But interestingly, Mexico proposed the Treaty of Tlatelolco, declaring the entirety of Latin America to agree to not having nuclear weapons, and every country in the region eventually signed it, except for French Guiana, because it is technically a territory of France, which is a nuclear-armed country, although the territory is still considered part of the treaty and France does not store nuclear weapons there. There are also similar treaties in place around the world since then which have agreed not to host, develop, or test any nuclear weapons, such as the Rarotonga Treaty covering the South Pacific, the Pelindaba Treaty covering the African continent, the Semiplatonisk Treaty covering Central Asia, the Bangkok Treaty covering Southeast Asia, and the Antarctic Treaty, which prohibits any military activity. However, while these treaties are useful, most of the world's nuclear-armed states store their nuclear weapons inside submarines, which means they are everywhere and anywhere, secretly hidden inside the oceans at any given time. This acts as one of the strongest deterrents, as even if a country's launch facilities were completely destroyed, the submarines lie ready, waiting to retaliate and are impossible to destroy. Creating nuclear weapons is an extremely expensive and conspicuous process. As we saw in the 1979 Vela incident, even a very small explosion in the middle of the Indian Ocean, hidden under cloud cover back in the 70s, was picked up by a US satellite. So you can imagine the level of surveillance today with the sophistication of satellites. Even when that submersible imploded at the bottom of the Atlantic, the US Navy still detected it. So it is very hard to have a secret nuclear program without the world knowing. But while those are the 10 nations that completed the process, it's likely only a matter of time until more are added to the list.
Crazy. Well, now we know about the nuclear weapons, and we don't like them. We don't like them at all. We don't want these crazies to get them. Anyways, I gotta go pick up my son from basketball practice. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys, today. I will see y'all tomorrow, man.